Hey guys, what is up? Public here back with another video, and today we're actually kicking off a series to launch Season 4. Over the next couple days, I'm going to be releasing kind of shorter videos that are very specific into one topic to help you get ready and play in Season 4 as a Shadow Priest. In today's video, we are covering talents and all the talent builds that you will need as a Shadow Priest in PvE for Season 4. Let's dive in. One quick thing I wanted to mention before I actually hop into all the talent builds, these are all assuming that you have the new tier set. So if you're watching this video early on in the season, you're probably still running Season 3 tier or something like that. I wanted to note, if you don't have any tier yet, nothing from Season 3, nothing from Season 4, all of these builds in the video are pretty good starter builds for you to use. However, if you are still using the Season 3 set bonus, check out the link in the description below. I have all of the builds for Season 3 below. You basically want to keep using the talent builds that you were using in Season 3 until you fully transition to the new Season 4 tier set. Something to keep in mind. Let's get back to the video. Alright, so if this video is being released, that means Icy Veins Guide has been updated. If you have not read that, you can go ahead and click the link in the description. It's going to have all of these builds, plus a lot more like in-depth description of when they make sense and kind of options they have with the build. In this video, I'm basically just going to go over the highlights of all the builds that you're going to use in PvE with some options kind of here and there. But just so you know, that link is in the description. Check that out if you haven't. Okay, so for talent builds, I have a lot that I'm going to go over in this video, but you know, a lot of this is kind of preference to some degree. So and I'll mention that whenever it makes sense. So this is our single target build for Season 4. Now, you notice this is actually taking Void Eruption. This is the first time we've actually kind of suggested to start with Void Eruption, and that's primarily because the set bonus that you're going to get in Season 4 kind of plays more into the Void Eruption playstyle, and you're seeing the gap has definitely shrunk between Void Eruption and Dark Ascension. In fact, even leaning towards Void Eruption in cases of movement or heavy multi-target. So this build in particular is pretty similar if you've ever played Void Form in the past. You're taking Mind Flay by default. Generally speaking, Spike doesn't play as well, and that's mostly because these points in this middle section are super valuable for Void Form. It loves these points. They're extremely valuable, and you're just kind of able to take all of these if you can drop Spike. And you know, so you're also taking, you know, things like Void Touch that people love. And this build is using Yogg-Saron and Cthulhu. So great single target build, great setup here. Especially if you're kind of newer to Void Form, this is the chance to try it out. In particular because you get access to Void Bolt with Void Eruption if you didn't know. And this just gives you another instant cast to use to break up the rotation and help with movement. Now that we've lost our Season 3 set bonus, you're not pressing Shadow or Death as much, so having that extra Void Bolt is really nice for movement. Now, if you're in a case where you can kind of full tunnel single target, Dark Ascension can still produce great results. So if you prefer running Dark Ascension, feel free to keep using it. This is the build that I would suggest for Dark Ascension. It is very, very close to the Void Eruption build. And again, if like in perfect conditions where you're able to just plant and not move at all, you can actually see better results with this. But in, you know, practice, movement's going to happen. This build is way more turret than it is today on like with old Season 3 stuff. Again, because we're not pressing Shadow or Death like on cooldown rotationally, you are just kind of a Mind Spike machine to some extent, and you're a bit more punished for movement because of that. But this build is here if you want it. You notice it's actually gotten a bit simpler. We're only taking Idol of Cthulhu. It's a single idol build, and you're actually only taking 9 points down here. So yeah, welcome to Season 4. Now, for most raid encounters, though, it's not pure single target. You're going to have instances where you're going to need to deal with adds. And as a Shadow Priest, if you have to kill adds at all, or even just tagging them is super valuable for that priority target to get Twisted Fate procs or whatever else, you need to pick up Shadow Crash here. Now, the problem with Shadow Crash is it means you're giving up something else in these points. So what that ended up happening is, if you recall, the Void Eruption version I mentioned, these points are super valuable for Void Eruption. What that means is, when you need to add Shadow Crash, Void Eruption starts to lag further behind Dark Ascension, even when you're talking about movement scenarios, especially because now Dark Ascension gets access to Shadow Crash, which does help with movement. So if you are in a fight with adds, I would actually personally suggest starting out with Dark Ascension. You're just simply adding it to the other build that I mentioned before. This is going to be like what I would consider your default for any fight that has adds, but you're still mostly focusing single target damage. So think of like Gnarl Root, or, you know, just those kind of traditional boss fights where it's mostly single target, but there are some adds that are spawning. Now, if you absolutely prefer to run the Void Eruption version and you want to go full Void Eruption version, I have given a version of that as well. You can see this build gets a little awkward. It ends up actually taking Mindbender, just because that's a better single target point than Screams of the Void, because now we've passed through it. And again, these are relatively close to each other. Void Eruption is about 1% behind Dark Ascension when you have to add Shadow Crash. And then both of these builds are roughly 3.5% behind their full single target equivalents. So what that means is you're losing about 3% damage pure single target to pick up Shadow Crash, but you're typically gaining much more than that by adding it, because now you can hit adds much more effectively. Okay, now let's cover council bosses. So council bosses inside of Raid are the ones where it's basically sustained AoE, where all the targets are basically living the full duration of the fight, and they're all dying at the end of the fight. In sustained AoE, we can kind of afford to go whole into Void Eruption. Dark Ascension just straight up falls off pretty hard here. So in those council fights, definitely lean towards Void Eruption. With this build, we're actually taking triple idol. So you have N'Zoth, Yogg-Saron, and Cthulhu. This ends up being a version of what you can actually run inside of Mythic Plus. Just kind of tweaked because it's sustained AoE and there's no kind of priority target damage as a question. You're just trying to kill everything as fast as possible, full even, and you're not really prioritizing single target damage in this case. So with this build, it is taking Distorted Reality, which means every time you get Insanity for Devouring Plague, you tab Devouring Plague a new target. Generally speaking, you're only going to get like 2 to 3 Devouring Plagues out, but still, even then, that's kind of how you rotate through bosses and get that extra damage, particularly this season because of Phantasmal Pathogen benefits here. As you're spreading Devouring Plague, you're getting way more apparition damage on each of those targets, which just kind of plays into this Distorted Reality build, which is why we're also taking Mind Devour to even spread that even further if you get lucky with procs. So this is the council build. Now, transitioning out of this into Mythic Plus. So in Mythic Plus, you have 2 primary builds that I'm going to suggest for folks to try out. The first one I'm going to recommend as a default is that triple idol build that you just saw in Council, but this one in particular is taking Mind's Eye. And say I also took Silence as well. We'll get to that in a second. In Mythic Plus, with this build, Void Eruption is just doing extremely well these days and kind of a wide variety of keys. In Season 3, you could actually play a version of this, but it usually didn't start until like super high keystone levels. With this, as long as you're pulling, a reasonable amount of mobs around your cooldowns every 2 minutes, you can get pretty great value out of this build. And in particular, I like to default this to Mind's Eye purely for the priority target damage. So what that means is during AoE, you're not spreading Devouring Plague like we were on Council. With Mind's Eye, you're just picking the biggest target that needs to die first, and you're tunneling your Devouring Plagues into that big high health target. Now, if you're in a case where there's actually multiple priority targets in that one pack, that's where you can actually run Distorted Reality instead and go back to the spreading Devouring Plague style to get more overall damage. So you kind of have a choice here. Do you want to have more priority target damage during AoE, or are you trying to spread Devouring Plague to get that overall damage up? Very dependent on the group and kind of what you're looking for, but I will note, especially for pushing keys, that priority target damage during AoE on a single target is very valuable, especially because not every DPS gets the option to run this. Like I also mentioned, this is defaulting to running Silence and Mental Fortitude. So this is strictly speaking a DPS loss, but if you're playing keys, especially as you go up in key level, you're going to need both of these just with coordinated groups. Some dungeons, maybe you can afford to drop a kick if you're playing with like a healer that has a kick or like a prot paladin, something like that. It's very group dependent. So as a default, I'm going to suggest taking both. If you're in that case, you can drop Silence or Mental Fortitude here to pick up either Mental Decay or a different flex point if you prefer. The other build as an option is the Dark Ascension version. So strictly speaking, Dark Ascension is not going to do our max AoE damage, but what it's really good at is kind of one pack at a time dungeon pulls. So if you're in a group and you're not really doing big chain pulls, you're kind of taking the dungeon at an easy, reasonable pace, maybe try out Dark Ascension instead, especially if you like that playstyle with Mindbender, Inescapable Torments, somewhat similar to what you're playing in Season 3. This is basically nice because you have a cooldown to press every single minute with Power Infusion every other set, and you're just getting a better spread of damage in that case. This is also slightly ahead in pure single target compared to the Void Eruption triple idol setup. So this is another option, especially if you're in those kind of, like I said, low-key, one pull at a time type dungeon environments. You can actually continue to run this as you push up in key level. Just kind of depends on what you're looking for. I will note that usually this build will almost always run Destroyed Reality. This is not ideal for priority target damage. Void Eruption, Yogg-Saron just does a much better job at that. So Destroyed Reality is usually the lock-in choice here. Now, the other option for dungeons, you also notice in the guide as well, you can go back and actually play the single target Shadow Crash specs instead. This is a really good option if you're in like pure tyrannical dungeon setup and you're like, okay, everyone else in my group can handle the ads no problem. I'm going to pick up more single target damage. You're going to get, again, 2-3% maybe more single target than our full AoE variants, which isn't nothing, and in some of those tyrannical cases might be a good option for you. Alright, so these are all the talent builds that you'll need as a Shadow Priest inside of Season 4. Hopefully this was helpful. I know it's been changed a little bit and tweaked over time. If you want all the just-in-time updates, check out the description below, and look out for more videos covering not only Season 4, but Alpha is up for the War Within as well. Big shout out to everyone that supported me on Patreon and my YouTube members. Appreciate all the support, guys. And if you didn't know, sometimes I'm also streaming on Twitch these days. If there's alpha content to stream, you might check that out as well. All the links are down below. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time.